on Saturday morning before the debate, Marco Rubio was the story. He was supposedly closing in on Donald Trump. He's been great in these debates so far. Then the debate came last night, and it was not a great night for Marco Rubio. So how problematic is this? And he kept repeating the same lines over and over again.
No, it is problematic. I mean, it's been an amazing week. Think about it. A week ago, everyone thought, like a week ago Sunday, right before Iowa, Trump's going to win Iowa. All the polls showed that. If he won Iowa, he'd probably win New Hampshire. Would he be stoppable and all this? Cruz beats him in Iowa. That's why I wrote that editorial in which I say, be careful to the Republican establishment. Don't assume that just because Ted Cruz beat him by 4 points or something like that, that Trump is gone. But anyway, of course, people ignored that. Then Cruz didn't get much of a bump out of Iowa, surprisingly, as the Iowa winner. And the story was Rubio surging from his third place, quote, victory in Iowa. And I thought he might well catch Trump here or come close, at least in New Hampshire, and be very, very formidable. And then a pretty disastrous, I think, moment in that debate Saturday night. I mean, people overdo the debate analysis. We all watch it intently, and then we judge it the way Olympics judges judge skating. And he missed this jump wasn't quite perfect. But I think this was a rare moment where something happened that might stick, I mean, fairly or unfairly. Just the sense that Rubio didn't didn't respond in the moment and sort of froze up or whatever.
You said we tend to overdo it. Let's overdo it for a couple of minutes
sure.
if we
Okay,
can.
absolutely.
The amazing thing, we're sitting there in the spin room, and not only would one assume a smart guy like Rubio was ready for every word out of Christie's mouth, even though he delivered them, I think, quite skillfully.
Right.
But this whole repetition thing with this line that was like an SNL kind of line that Barack Obama knows exactly what he's doing. And then today, when you wake up, even if you didn't see the debate, and you see all the news stations playing them sequentially, it's like Rick Perry forgetting the third cabinet secretary he wanted to get rid of. No?
Yeah, no, I think Perry is a good analogy. And that run really damaged Perry because people already thought, is he up to the job? And then he forgets, understandably, honestly, what does it matter? He forgets the third cabinet department, but somehow that just crystallized the sense that he can't be president. Other people make mistakes. Many other mistakes were made in debates that have an effect short term and are then forgotten, obviously. And the question is this a Rick Perry-like moment for Marco Rubio? Probably not. His campaign's not over by any means. He might still do pretty well in New Hampshire. And obviously, when we go on to there's another debate next Saturday night in South Carolina, and at that point, people put it behind him. But there has been a sense with Rubio. The critics have certainly said he's bright. He memorizes these answers, but it's a little bit memory, and can he really discuss these issues? And that's what you really want in a leader and a president and a commander-in-chief, a grasp of the issues. Take Ted Cruz. I mean, Ted Cruz also memorizes things very well. He's famous for having memorized the Constitution when he was in high school. He's an excellent appellate lawyer. Those guys have very good memories, But I would say if you watched Cruz, for example, on North Korea, that was an interesting moment, I thought, in the debate. And Martha Raddatz says, what would you do about this launch that had just happened? Cruz gives one answer. Martha Raddatz being fairly tough on Cruz. I would say, well, but Cruz said, I want to get an intelligence briefing before I say anything too definitive. That's what a president should do. And Martha says, well, I mean, you certainly talk a lot about the Middle East, and you haven't had intelligence briefings there. And I thought Cruz quite aptly says, well, I have had many intelligence briefings on that, and that's over a period of months and years. But this happened tonight, and I would want to get a briefing on exactly what had happened in the last few hours. And I thought it wasn't brilliant. It didn't knock it out of the park, but it was a good sort of reaction on the spot. And what was unnerving a little bit about Rubio, and I say this as someone who likes Rubio and respects him, was the kind of, just repeating it almost word for word. I wanted to dispel the myth. I mean, it was a little like, fine, he says that in his stump speech. And these guys do. I mean, to be fair to these politicians, I've worked for them. It's tough going around speaking 3, 4, 6 times a day. And of course you're going to give the same speech. No one can give 6 different speeches a day. It would be kind of crazy to try. And so it does kind of get embedded in your almost hardwired into you. But it was a poor moment for Rubio. Kasich had a good debate. I think especially Bush pretty good too. Christie certainly beat up Rubio. I don't know how much people will turn to him as a positive force. I think if in the so-called moderate or establishment lane, and who knows, it's kind of a black box out there, honestly. So many voters are going to break late. A lot of independents haven't made up their minds. Some of the Republicans haven't. But I'd say Kasich has been running a kind of classic moderate New Hampshire campaign, which appeals to some chunk of the New Hampshire electorate, maybe not 50% of it, but could Kasich get 20% as the kind of good government, reach across the aisle, successful governor of a Midwestern state? He's the guy I'd bet on to be sort of the dark horse. If you ask me who's going to be second to Trump, who might even challenge Trump, get into the 20s, 20% plus, I think it would be John Kasich.
We're talking about Rubio before having a difficult debate night. As we said, he was kind of the rising star before this difficult debate night. And you wonder how much the debate does matter. That if his vote stays strong, if Rubio were to come in like a good, strong second, good, strong third, I mean, it's a whole different ballgame.
It is. No, I think if it matters, it will matter here in New Hampshire. These things don't last usually nationally for weeks and months. They make a difference when someone makes a mistake and the voters in the state in which that mistake is made sort of register that, oh, it has changed my opinion. But then voters in other states, in effect, say, oh, well, gee, they took a closer look at Rubio than I did, and they backed off him, and maybe I'll take a closer look at Bush or Kasich or something. I think that's kind of the psychology of how it works among those voters who are undecided or uncertain about their commitments. So, no, I think Tuesday night will be the judge. And it may be, incidentally, that we're all making too much of it, and that voters will decide they like him and they're fine with him, and this is just his mind froze for 25 seconds, and so what?
Well, let's assume that we are making too much of it, and he does do reasonably well on Tuesday. I've wondered a lot about Rubio in terms of, when you look at Rubio, he looks to me very young. I mean, he's the same age as Cruz, but he looks like he could still be in high school in the debating team. And you wonder, assuming Hillary Clinton is the nominee, does that play well because his youth, the future, against...
Or Bernie Sanders, who's 74. I mean, they're both
right.
old.
Against someone that's older, or does that look, too much of a whippersnapper to have his hand on the button, as it were?
I mean, generally in the last several elections, it hasn't hurt to be the younger candidate. I think Obama benefited quite a lot running against McCain and Romney as the next generation guy. And Clinton, I was in that first Bush White House, Clinton benefited running against George H.W. Bush and then Bob Dole as the young guy. Rubio is basically the same age as Clinton and Obama when they ran successfully for president within a couple of years. So, I could argue as a Republican type, I would say the Republican view, I think, is finally we get the next generation. You can think what you want about Rubio or Cruz, but they're 45 years old, and the Democratic contest, this party of, quote, progressives, has a 68-year-old and a 74-year-old.
Far too long not talking about Donald Trump. I'm sorry, Bill Kristol.
Exactly.
By the way, does everybody tell you look exactly like Richard Dreyfuss? I mean,
that's right. Yeah, I get that about once every year or two.
Oh my God.
Is that good or bad? Is that okay? People like
you look like Bernie Madoff. That's
I hadn't thought of that. I knew that was going to be a double-edged sword there.
Bill Kristol, did you not tweet out something in December asking people for suggestions for a new name for the Republican Party should Trump win the nomination? Number one, did you get any good suggestions?
Yeah, mostly funny suggestions,
like
a lot of hostile suggestions. One Trump supporter suggested sore losers, for example. So we got like the Federalist Party and the Hamilton Party.
So you coming around at all? I mean, we've seen establishment person after establishment person. We had Trent Lott on the radio with us last week with Tom Daschle, and Lott's one of those people, a la Bob Dole, saying essentially Cruz is so scary, they argue, that I guess we could deal with Trump. Have you reached that point, or you're nowhere near?
No, I'm the opposite. That is, I think Cruz, Rubio, Kasich, Bush, I can, accept them all. They're in different parts on the spectrum of conservatism, different manner, styles, some different views, not that many different views, actually. But Trump, I just think, it's not clear to me he has the temperament to be president. He's certainly not proven to be a conservative over the years of any manner or stripe. And I just find his character questionable for the presidency of the United States. So I really would have trouble supporting Donald Trump. So the establishment guys, I agree with you. They would prefer Trump. They think they can cut deals with him. They can work with him. Cruz scares them because he's a pretty strong, pretty ideological, uncompromising conservative.
When you say temperament, what do you mean?
In Trump's case, he's a bully. He insults people. He, both in business and in the campaign, he takes advantage of people and ridicules the disabled. And just all the POW comment. Each of these things, people have a bad day, they make a comment that they still considered, but a series of them does show something about the man, and he clearly relishes that, he enjoys it. Now, maybe you want that kind of person, in some limited job, bargaining for you with Putin or something like that, but you don't want him as president of the United States.
Well, Putin's going to be wearing a Make America Great Again hat pretty soon. So who's a bigger threat to America, according to Bill Kristol, Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump?
Well, that's why we need the third party to save the country from either alternative.
No, but seriously, what do you think?
I mean, I think with Hillary Clinton, we kind of know what we would get. In my view, it would be a continuation of a lot of bad policies. With Trump, it's so erratic and unpredictable that it's, I don't know, it's hard for me to imagine voting for either, honestly.
But staying on Donald Trump for just a couple of minutes, well, most people who comment on pro and con just focus on him. Let's step back. What does it say about America in 2016 and a significant chunk of the Republican electorate that he's their guy?
Well, we'll see how big a chunk it is. I mean, in Iowa, it's about a quarter, and this happens a lot. I mean, Pat Buchanan got more than a quarter of the vote here in New Hampshire, and the country didn't fall apart. And I think Buchanan, in some ways, was more offensive than Trump. I mean, willing to really play in a more overt way with people who were anti-Semitic and nativists in a probably more mean-spirited way than Trump. With Trump, in a way, one reason I think people feel entitled to support him is he expresses our worries, our anger, our resentment, our concerns, and somehow he does it sort of half-jokingly, so people kind of don't think he's really going to go do something terrible. I still think it's irresponsible. No, it's worrisome. And look, if I were a moderate liberal, or I have moderate liberal friends, I'd be a little worried that half the Democratic electorate is for Bernie Sanders. So there is more discontent out there than the political class, and I guess I'm part of it, in Washington has realized, and the media elite has realized. And I sympathize with that discontent. The elites have screwed a lot of things up in the last 15, 20 years. Political elites, economic elites. It's not ridiculous to think that Wall Street kind of helped, and Wall Street and Washington together brought on an unbelievably bad financial crisis. And who exactly paid a price for that, you know? So a lot of middle class and working class people, not a whole lot of people in Washington or New York, which are doing pretty well as both cities and, you know, more symbolically in terms of the political and economic elite. So I sympathize with the discontent, but as we know from history, even legitimate discontent, if it just becomes pure discontent, can lead to bad outcomes.
You know what I think is fascinating is the number of people that will tell you that their first choice is Donald Trump, their second choice Bernie Sanders,
Yes.
or vice versa. And the whole idea, and Trump had a moment with this last night in the debate when he was getting booed, and he said something like, well, you're booing because you're all the donors and the big money people out there, and you don't like me because I don't take your money and stuff. That has a big appeal to people because they do feel, rightly, that the whole system is about big donors, special interests, and positions are taken, and Hillary's faced this about Wall Street, and a lot of Republicans face this, that everyone's in the tank.
No, I thought that was a very revealing moment last night. It was also revealing to me that the people I talked to who were there, some of the local media and national media, thought, ooh, that's a mistake of Trump to take on the audience, because then they booed him and all that. And Matthew Dowd actually made a shrewd comment. This was just chatting off camera. He said, I don't know, if you're in the audience, isn't it sort of true? I think each campaign got 20 seats, and then the other seats, some of them went to activists and hardworking Republican precinct captains and stuff. But some of those seats undoubtedly did go to donors to the New Hampshire Republican Party and the campaigns. And you know, that's not terrible, but it was kind of an effective point, I thought, that Trump made. Yeah, so no, I think there is a real sense out there that the elites have not been held accountable, and Sanders and Trump have tapped into that.
Bill, Kristol, just a couple more things about Trump, and we want to get a few thoughts on the Democrats before you go. If he came in second, he's now suggesting he really came in first because of all the Cruz shenanigans. If Donald Trump, despite leading in national polls by a lot, if Donald Trump is number 2 again, does he go home?
I don't know. I've talked to people who know him well. I barely do know him, and they do think he's not really constitutionally set up to slog through, 20, 30, 40 states, running second in some and third in some and maybe first in some, but not sort of having an easy time of it. I don't know. He seems like he's been pretty serious about the campaign, to be fair to him.
But his whole brand is winning. I mean, it's not an original thought by me. It's all about winning.
Right. So, I mean, he'd have to win somewhere pretty soon, I should think. Not as strong. And I think in New Hampshire, unlike Iowa, where he had been behind at one point of Cruz, then he overtook him and then lost, but it was a few points, and it's a caucus. Yeah, in a state like this where he's been ahead by, 10, 12 points in the average, I think that's about the average in the polls, in a primary in which Republicans and independents can vote, if he loses here, I think it would do severe damage to him. Yeah.
One last thing about the conservative side of things, and embodied in you is one of the leaders of that movement. This is not new. I mean, we come from Massachusetts, where the guy who essentially created the forerunner to the hated Affordable Care Act was the nominee of the Republican Party. And even though Mitt Romney tried to run away from it, right, Romney Care was the gave birth to Obamacare. So it seems that despite the conventional wisdom, conservatives have a lot less power to pick the man or woman of their dreams in the last two elections than the bravado would suggest. Is that not a fair statement?
Yes. I mean, I think one reason, in fact, some conservatives, grassroots conservatives, have been attracted to Trump is they have lost time and time again since Reagan. They lost, in their point of view, they lost to Dole, they lost to Bush, even to some degree in 2000, and they certainly lost to McCain and Romney. Their favorite candidates didn't win. And so there's a sense of, we can't just go with a normal kind of, the more conservative guy who's going to lose, the next Rick Santorum or Mike Huckabee or Steve Forbes or whatever. We need to really, and Trump is sort of outside the box. And the fact that he's just did so well, that meteoric rise, I think a lot of people decided to see in him what they wanted to see because they were frustrated.
Well, you also wonder whether if the Republican Party moved beyond the social issues, stopped talking about Planned Parenthood, stopped talking about gay marriage, stopped talking about those types of things, and just talked about smaller government, fiscal responsibility, they might get a lot of the younger people now who are saying, forget it, I'm not going to.
Well, we'll see if the younger people stay there. I think Republicans will do quite well, actually. They did quite well in 2014, and I think will do pretty well in 2016 with younger voters. They're in disagreement with them on some of these social issues, but I think it's very often said, yes, if only they could get beyond the social issues. But for every, up here in New England, maybe so, in other parts of the country, there are an awful lot of young people who are culturally conservative, go to church, maybe they are on same-sex marriage. I think they have changed their view, but on the life issue, if anything, there's some evidence that younger people are a little more pro-life. In any case, they certainly haven't moved the other direction on that. But these people also are concerned about their future. Their mother or grandmother's on using Medicare and depends on it. And they get nervous with all this cheerful libertarian, economic conservative talk about how we're going to turn it into vouchers. Trust us, we don't need to have these big government programs. A lot of people in America depend on these big government programs. So I'd say as a pure political matter of sort of votes, it's complicated. The economic conservative message, I think it's the right message in terms of policy mostly, but it's not automatically the most popular message in the world.
But last thing for me, Bill Kristol, is you remember, I'm sure as well, if not better than we, Latinos 71-29, Obama over Romney. African Americans, understandably, first black president, just astronomical. Marjorie and I are sitting in the spin room last night. I'm looking at the stage. Two Cuban Americans, a black guy. The Democrats had two white guys and a white woman. Why is the Republican Party not doing an all-out effort to try, not to get a majority, but to essentially take a significant enough chunk of people of color that they win come November?
I think many are trying to, and I think the Republican National Committee is trying to. It's hard to do it in practice without looking either patronizing or sort of just silly. Look, I think the truth is, if the Republican race came down to Cruz versus Rubio, that would have to have an effect on people's judgment of the character of the party. I mean, it is interesting that in Iowa, this conservative, evangelical, anti-immigration, apparently, Republican electorate, the 30%, 29% of them voted for Cruz, as we were just saying. 23% voted for Rubio, and about 10% for Ben Carson? So I'm doing the math in my head here, but about 60% of them voted for Latinos and an African American. So, I think that itself over time will have some effect.
And one last thing for me, Bill Kristol from the Weekly Standard. Let's just end the Democrats here one more time. Hillary's having a lot of trouble with her Wall Street questioning from Bernie Sanders. Is that a bigger problem for her, or is Bernie Sanders' bigger problem with the idea that he's making realistic promises that just can't work? Who's got the bigger problem?
Well, we'll see. It'll get argued out. You still have to favor.
Look at the smile on Bill Kristol's face.
You still have to favor Hillary. I am generally puzzled. I'm both puzzled and interested by the following. Hillary Clinton is an intelligent woman, and she has answers to Bernie Sanders on these issues. It's not like Hillary Clinton doesn't know a fair amount about economic policy from being in the White House and being in the Senate and even Secretary of State in some sense. And the answer, if I were, advising Hillary Clinton, to say what I think she really believes is, look, you're a Democratic socialist. Fine, I'm not a socialist. I'm a Bill Clinton type Democrat. You know what? In the 90s, we had pretty good economic performance. You can help Main Street, and Wall Street has to do well to some degree. You need to have banks that work, and people have to invest. It's good if the stock market goes up. It's not bad for people in terms of their IRAs and their pensions. Now, then she would say, of course, I'm not like those terrible Republicans. I want to cut taxes on the rich and all that. But she has a coherent defense of her economic views against Bernie Sanders. But she hasn't made it. And I don't know quite why. I think maybe because she is worried that in the Democratic Party, as it's now constituted, and given the mood of the moment, she's a little nervous that if they actually have an actual economic policy debate, I mean, Bernie Sanders says, what is this, the business model of Wall Street is fraud. I mean, it's ridiculous, honestly. I mean, is that a grown-up statement to make? And incidentally, a lot of people work on Wall Street and for Wall Street firms. I mean, if he really believed that, public television would have to refuse all donations from, Merrill Lynch or Citibank. Well, that's why I mentioned that. All the people who have relatives working for any major bank in the United States would have been complicit in fraud. I mean, it's a kind of extreme statement, really. We talk about Trump's extreme statements, but that's a pretty strange extreme statement. But she's a little worried, I think, a little timid about taking it on. And that does say something about the mood of the country as well, the Trump-Sanders phenomenon together. And then I think in Sanders' case about the mood of some chunk, we'll see how big a chunk, of the Democratic Party.